Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Melissa Mata. I am the Municipal Research Analyst here at CML. Thank you so much for attending today's webinar. Today's presentation is available on our website, www.cml.org, under Training Materials. And the webinar is being recorded, so it will also be posted on our website. For those of you who aren't familiar with the webinar format, you should see a control panel to the top right of the screen. You have an orange arrow to the left of the panel, which will minimize the entire box. All participants will be muted for the webinar, but we do encourage you to ask questions by typing them into the question box on the control panel. Our presenter today is Karen Goldman. She is the consultant for our Municipal Clerk Advisor Program, and I'm pretty sure that by now most of you are familiar with her, and if you aren't, you probably should get familiar with her before your election April 3rd. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Karen.
Good afternoon and welcome. Thanks for attending today. Format today is going to be a little different. Normally in the past we've had two topics that we're discussing. Today we have one. It's kind of the final piece before your April 3rd elections, and once we are done discussing the canvas of the vote, we're going to open it up to questions, and the questions can be very wide-ranging. They don't have to be on this topic. They can be on anything. I have received some questions in advance, and as Melissa said, you can just go ahead and type in your questions, and we'll do our best to answer them. So we shall begin here. This one. See. All right, you're going to, I always ask for technical assistance here.
Let's see. Oops. I'll just sit there.
Okay. All right. Okay, so before we get to the canvas, let's talk about what happens at the close of the polls. And so the first thing you're going to have to do in order to do the canvas, we're going to have to get some forms created by your election judges, and this is what we're talking about here. So the election judges, after the polls have closed, and again, we're talking about both mail ballot and polling place elections, but after the polls have closed, the judges are going to tally the votes that have been received, and they're going to indicate the vote for all candidates and all ballot items using numbers on what's called a judge's certificate. And there's actually two parts to the judge's certificate. First of all, if you look at the 31-10-613 subsection 1, you'll see the language that you use on the judge's certificate. So you want to go back and you want to create your certificate based upon that language. And then there is a written statement also in that same statute, but in subsection 2, and that statement is returned to the clerk along with all the unused ballots, the spoiled ballots, the ballot stubs, and includes the following information: the number of ballots issued for a polling place election, also it would be for a mail ballot election, the number of ballots voted, and you have separate tallies in a polling place election for absentee and or replacement ballots. And you probably should have that same information. You're not going to get a lot of absentee ballots in a polling place, in a mail ballot election, but you probably will get your replacement ballots. The idea is to differentiate the different kinds of ballots that were requested and sent out. The number of ballots that were mailed out, again, for the mail ballot election, and then the number of undeliverable ballots. So the number of undeliverable ballots and the number of ballots returned should equal the number of ballots you mailed out, of course, and then, of course, the number of ballots voted. So that is what you need. And is this okay? All right. So once that's done, you're going to go ahead and you're going to do the canvas. The canvas is a survey. It is basically a review of what the judges did. And what you are reviewing are the documents that were created at the end of the election after the polls have closed, which is why I wanted to talk about what you do once the polls have closed. So canvass by definition means to examine carefully, scrutinize, or to make a thorough examination. The purpose of the canvass, as listed here, is to review the election results as determined by the election judges and to verify that what they said happened actually happened. It is important to understand that the canvass is not a recount. So what you are not doing in the canvass is going through and recounting all the ballots and making sure you're basically looking. It's kind of like a proofreading. If you write a document and then you proofread it to make sure you haven't made any mistakes. And this is what you're looking for in the canvass. So the canvass is conducted by the clerk and the mayor. The mayor is the first person that you need to include on your canvass as long as the mayor was not a candidate in the race. And if you don't have a mayor, then you find somebody in this order. You contact one of your municipal judges. If your municipal judge is not available, or you can contact a member of your election commission should you have one. If you don't have an election commission, you don't have a municipal judge, your municipal judge is not available, your mayor is not available, then what you do, you find a person who is qualified to serve as an election judge, but did not serve as an election judge in your election. And in order to qualify as an election judge, they merely have to be a registered elector anywhere in the state. Now let me pause here and talk about the canvass board a little bit. Clerks have asked throughout the election whether they should be or can be an election judge. And my response to that question has been no. The reason what you do as the DEO is you oversee the election. And when you look at this list of people who are there to help you out in conducting the canvass, you will notice that none of them serve as election judges. And the reason you don't serve as an election judge is because you do not want to put yourself in a position where you are verifying work that you did. If that were the case, then the election judges themselves would conduct the canvass, and that's not the way the law works. And the reason, again, and so by having outside people who did not serve as election judges conduct the canvass, what you're doing is ensuring the integrity of the election and the election results yourself. Okay, so the canvass can be completed as early as election night once all the judges have done their work and they've certified the ballot, issued their judge's certificate, but only if certain things, requirements have been met. The canvass must be completed no later than 10 days after the election. And here's what determines the time frame for conducting the canvass, whether you can do it on election night or you have to wait and do it at some later point, but no later than 10 days after the day of the election. If you have UOCAVA covered voters, by law, they return their ballots to you, and those ballot envelopes, the ballots have been mailed no later than the day of the election, and you've received them no later than 8 days after the election. Those ballots are included in the total of votes cast. So if you've sent ballots to UOCAVA covered voters, you cannot do the canvass until you know that all those UOCAVA ballots have been returned. Additionally, if you are conducting a mail ballot election, as you know, if you cannot verify a signature and state that the signature on the return envelope of a mail ballot matches the signature in the Secretary of State's voter registration database, you have to give the voter the opportunity to cure their signature, and those cures must be received, no later than 8 days after the day of the election. So if you have UOCAVA covered ballots and you're doing a mail ballot election, or you only have UOCAVA covered voters, not ballots, UOCAVA covered voters, and you're doing a polling place election, you must wait to conduct your canvass until the 8th day after the election has passed. And I'm going to talk about how you deal with UOCAVA ballots in just a moment. So that will determine when you can do it. And please know that while you can release your election results, as soon as you finish counting all your ballots on election night, understand that they are considered unofficial until the canvass has been completed. Now, you may say, well, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that at the point you do the canvass, you'll be able to figure out, number one, will you need to do, do you need to do a recount? Number two, do you have any tie votes? Number three, you're waiting on UOCAVA ballots. So how can you say that anything is official until all those procedures have been done? But recognize that you can release the results. Just make sure everybody understands that they are unofficial. And, basically you could say unofficial election results. Then after you do the canvass, you can change that to official election results. And we also recommend that the candidates not be sworn in until after the canvass has been completed. And I know that's going to be a change for some of the smaller communities who might have their regular board meetings the night after the election day. But I think it's well worth waiting to swear somebody in until the canvass has been completed. Okay. So, things to look for when you conduct the canvass. That what you want to do is you want to make sure that the election returns, the certificate of the judges that has been filled out after all the ballots have been counted, that those returns include all the information required by law. Now, the rule for most election procedures is what's called substantial compliance. And what that means is that while not every I has to be dotted and not every T has to be crossed, that you have to substantially comply with what the law requires. So in this particular case, let's say the language in the returns does not exactly match the language as required in state law. As long as the elements of that statement are all included, then you've met substantial compliance and you don't need to have your judges go back and rewrite the form. Now, you're going to be providing this form to your judges, so my suggestion, of course, would be find the state statute as we listed it in the prior slide and make sure that whatever it is you give them does conform with state law, and then you're not going to have any issues. Omissions or clerical mistakes. Now, this is really important. These must be fixed, and you see the word shall, these shall be corrected by the judges of the election, and if you go to this statute, you will see this is listed. So even though your election judges are done on election day, if there are any clerical mistakes that need to be fixed, you're going to need to call them in so that they can make the changes. This is not something that you and your assistant as a canvass board are permitted to do. So my thought would be that you remind your judges that if there's any issues, they are going to be called back in. The other thing that happens as a part of the canvass is once you know officially that there is a tie vote, then you go ahead and you can break the vote and the tie, and that is done by lot. In the same manner as you drew names to be on the ballot, you could break the tie the same way. You could put the two people who have tie votes put their names in a hat. You could draw straws, you can pick a card, you could do whatever it is. But if you look at the last sentence, this is a situation where you contact the people whose votes are tied, and you let them know when you're going to break the tie vote, and give them the opportunity to attend and watch that happen. Okay. So, all right. Once the canvass has been completed, you prepare what's called a certificate of election. And you do that from the abstract of votes. And what the abstract of votes is the forms that the judges have filled out after election night. And once you verified as part of the canvass. And the certificate election concludes the following: the names of the candidates in the order they appeared on the ballot, the total votes cast for each candidate. And what I have always done in the past is I've had two lists. Following each name, I've had a column that identifies the regular ballots and a column that's identified the absentee ballots, and then a total for each, so that you know which is which. The other thing that's not listed on here, but if you have an item on the ballot, you would identify the yes notes for that particular ballot item as well as the no votes for that item. And please be aware that not everybody votes for everything that's on the ballot. So the total number of yes and no votes may differ from the total number of votes cast for all candidates. It's just, people vote on what they either understand or think is important to vote on. So if you come up with different totals, don't worry about it. And then finally, what you include on your form is you have a signature, your signature, and the signature of the person who assisted in the canvass. And I would also add that you put down the date that you did that. And then what happens to the certificate of election is as follows. You file it in your office. It is part of the election, and it becomes part of the election records that you will keep in accordance with the retention schedule. You also will publish it in a newspaper of general circulation within the municipality in the same way that you published the notice of your election in the newspaper. And if you don't have a newspaper of general circulation, then you would post it in whatever is your official posting location. And then finally, what you're going to do is you're going to file this with the Division of Local Government in the Colorado Department of Local Affairs, DOLA. And this is a change from past practice, because a couple of years ago there was a law that was a bill that was introduced and passed that changed the location of filing your election results from the Secretary of State's office to the Department of Local Affairs. And the filing is electronic, and in order to file it, you need to contact the Department of Local Affairs and to get a username and password. And if you already have if you already have such a password with the Department of Local Affairs because you're obligated to file something else with them, some other kind of document not election related, you don't have to get a separate username and password. But you want to go ahead and contact the Department of Local Affairs. And my suggestion would be that you do it ahead of time so they can issue that to you. So when you've done your canvass and it's been approved and it's ready to go, then you can just go ahead and submit it to them. And don't forget to do that. All right. And then sorry, I went back. Whoops. All right. And this is my last slide, and then I've got some other things I want to talk about before I answer any questions. Overlapping 4-year terms of office. This has been an issue for a lot of municipal clerks. And I want to just remind people of how this works. If you have 4-year overlapping terms, and you are also on the ballot, have candidates who are running because they were appointed to fill a vacant position, and by law, they have to run in the next regular election, and that election is not the election at which that term of office would normally be filled, then what you're going to have a situation where you're going to have people who are going to be elected and get the 4-year term, and there are going to be people who are elected who are going to get the shortened or 2-year term. And the way you determine this is by the number of votes. That the 4-year terms go to the candidates receiving the highest number of votes, and then the person or persons receiving the lowest number of votes, once those 4-year terms are filled, get the shortened term. And then again, they would have to run again in the following election, which is when that term would normally be up. I cannot emphasize the importance of keeping track of what happens when you fill your positions by appointment, because if you don't keep track, it's very easy to get out of sync, and the next thing you know, you're going to be faced with the situation where you've got all of your Board of Trustee positions that are all being selected the same year, and you don't know who's had a 4-year term, who's had a 2-year term, and that, of course, is important for the issue of term limits if you haven't opted out of term limits. Now, I know that's a lot of information, but if you think about it, it's really important. So if you're relatively new to your municipality, or even if you're not new to your municipality, and these kinds of records have not been kept very well in the past, my suggestion is start now and make sure you keep track of them moving forward. All right. Couple of things I said I was going to talk about. So and I had a couple of questions about this. So before we answer any questions that have been turned in, I want to answer some questions from people who have who submitted questions to me. So let's talk about handling the UOCAVA ballots. And of course, this would be only for people conducting mail ballot elections. What is it that you do? All right. This is especially important for municipalities that send out very few UOCAVA ballots. However, it would apply in any case. The important thing to remember is that what we want to do is we want to maintain the integrity of the election, and we want to make sure that every person's vote is private. And that's why ballot stubs in a polling place election and also in a mail ballot election are removed from the ballot before the ballot is counted, because then once you just have ballots, you have no idea who voted which ballot. You just have voters and you have ballots, but you don't have any idea. Now, with UOCAVA covered voters, you do know who those people are. And when only 1 or 2 ballots come in, and you've canvassed, or you've not canvassed, but you've accounted for all the other votes, a vote one way or the other not only is going to change the total that you have already told, given out to people, but you are going to know how that person votes. So what we suggest is that you set aside a few ballots, maybe somewhere between 5 and 10. The number is up to you. I would make sure it's an odd number, whatever number you choose, but it's up to you. And you would set those ballots aside and you would not count them until you know that you've received all the UOCAVA covered ballots or no UOCAVA covered ballots. And then you would go ahead and process them, add them to the results, and then do your canvass from there. So what you would do, and here's my suggestion of what you would do. Obviously, when all your ballots come in, you want to go ahead and check them in and show that they've been returned. I would recommend that you date stamp the outside of the envelope, and then on your voter registration list, you indicate the date that they were returned. And then you set those aside, and then once you've got them checked in a mail ballot election, your first step, of course, would be signature verification. And I've put some instructions out on the on the listserv, and also I think we did it through CMCA, and if you think you need to see them again, I'll be happy to put them out there. But you go ahead and you verify that the signatures, and if the signatures have been verified, then they get ready for count. The ballots get ready to be counted, and if you can't verify them, you send the letter out to the voter asking them, did they vote a ballot, and all that kind of thing. And at some point during that process, after you verified the signature, go ahead and set aside how many ever ballots you want to do it. You can either do it at the beginning of the process, you could do it at the end of the process, but you want to do it after you've verified the signatures. And the reason for that is if you wait until the 8 days after the election to verify the signatures of the ballots that you have set aside, and there is a problem with one of the signatures, it's too late for that voter to cure his signature. So do it at the front end and then randomly select. I don't really care how you do it. You can just, if you've got a tray of ballot envelopes, pick 3 or 4 out and set them aside. Make a note that states what you're going to do with them. And then it's going to be, and then what you're going to do before your canvass and by your election judges, you're going to add those ballots to your count. And at that point, the judges can fill out a new judge's certificate with the new count, with the new date. In fact, if you're going to do it, I would suggest that the first one you do on election night, you fill it out, and then somewhere on it you say this is unofficial, and then you do the official one, and then you bring your canvas board in, and then they do the canvas from there. So that is what I would suggest that you do in terms of dealing with UOCAVA covered ballots. And then that way, if you've held out 3 ballots and you get 4 more in, you've got 7 ballots, and you don't know whose ballots those 7 belong to. So again, that maintains the integrity of the election and the privacy of the voter. So let's see. Let me see. So we've got that. Okay, so moving on, away from the canvas and UOCAVA ballots, I was asked a question whether members of the media were allowed to interview watchers and/or judges within the polling place. I would say that for watchers, if the media wanted to interview the watchers, I would ask that they be taken outside the polling place for that interview. In terms of interviewing the election judges, I would say that I would be very careful about allowing that. I think the only thing that the election judges should be allowed to say is respond to a question of how busy are you today, or how many people have voted, or that kind of thing, because the role of the judges is to be a judge, and they're going to be pretty busy, whether it's a polling place election or whether they're processing ballots on election day. And remember, watchers are not allowed to interfere with the election process, and if you believe that interviewing both watchers and or judges would interfere with the election, as the DEO and the person in charge of the election, it is not only your right, it is your obligation to ask people to step away from the polling location if they want to be interviewed. So that's what I would do. And then finally, there was a question regarding seals and the seal log. The purpose, when the purpose of the seals is to ensure the safety of the ballots. So, for example, in a mail ballot election, let's say you've gone through the process, you've checked your ballots in, you've done your signature verification, you've opened the envelopes, you've torn off the tag, the stubs, and then now you're starting to count ballots. Once you've counted ballots, and the ballots have been counted and you've identified how many ballots you counted on that particular day, my recommendation is that you put those ballots into a box. It could be a ballot box, it could be a banker's box, it could be something, and then what you do is you seal that box to make sure that nobody is going to be able to get in and take any of those ballots out, or God forbid, recount those ballots when they've already been counted. And what you want to do is you want to close up the box however you want to do it. If it's a ballot box, you can put one of those zip ties on it or a lock. If it's a banker's box, you can tape the lid to the box, and then what you do is you put a seal on it, and what the seal does, and you can take a mailing label, a fat mailing label, and write a number on it and put the date it was sealed and then the signatures of the people who sealed it, and then you put that same information on a log that you know that box number A was sealed by seal number 1 on such and such a date by these people. And the purpose, again, is to maintain the integrity of the election and the ballots. So those were the questions that I received. We do have some questions here. I'm going to have Melissa read those questions to me, and I'm going to do my best to go ahead and answer them.
Thank you, Karen. As a reminder to our participants, you can feel free to enter in a question, anything about the election. It doesn't just have to be the canvas, because we have some time set aside, and Karen is here ready to help. So our first question: if all of your UOCAVA covered voters' ballots are in before the 8th day, can you complete your canvas once you know that they're all in?
Yes.
Awesome. Moving right along.
Yeah, that was easy. Right.
Yes. My charter says I have to swear in my new council members at the next regularly scheduled council meeting, which is 2 weeks later. And that could be problematic if there is a recount. So how do we avoid violating a home rule charter and/or the state law in this situation?
Charters prevail. So let me talk a little bit about charters. I have, in going, in helping people out and looking at various situations that people have, I have come to the conclusion that the less detail you have in a charter when it comes to elections, the better off you are, because you will run into situations like this. I think that in this particular situation, you're just going to have to make it work. You have to follow your charter, and until and unless you change your charter to match state law, you have to go by your charter. Now, not only do I believe that charters should be as general as they can be, I think when it comes to ordinances, my feeling, again, from answering questions and seeing what the situation is out there, is that if you are doing your elections in accordance with Title 31, all your municipal election code really has to say is that elections shall be conducted in accordance with Title 31 and maybe Title I as necessary. And then the only thing you put in your code is if you want to do something that is different from state law, because I guarantee you the moment you put something in your code that has a date on it and the state law changes, then you're going to have to change your code. And I'll tell you where this has shown up a lot is in canceling the election. When we passed a law a few years ago allowing people to cancel their election 64 days before the day of the election, there were several municipalities that still had that 20-day cancellation in their code and didn't realize it until this election showed up. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox at this point. I do think it's something you want to think about, and to go back and answer the question, your charter prevails.
Thanks. All right, next question. Do all 3 judges need to be present for the count of UOCAVA ballots if that count happens at a later date after Election Day?
It's still part of your election, and you do need to have 3 election judges, so I would say yes.
Okay. Can you count the UOCAVA ballots that come in prior to and on Election Day at that time, or should all UOCAVA ballots be saved and counted after the 8 days?
I think you go ahead and process them as you receive them, just as you are going to have the ability to, well, let me back up. If you're doing a polling place election, you have to wait till the close of polls to count the UOCAVA covered ballots, because they're, in essence, they're kind of absentee ballots, and that's what you do with absentee ballots. But if you're having a mail ballot election and you can begin processing your ballots 15 days before the day of the election, as your UOCAVA covered ballots come in, go ahead and get them processed.
Wonderful. We are a very small office. Can I use one of my office staff to help canvass?
If your office staff does not serve as an election judge, and if your office staff is there, first of all, you haven't said what kind of election you're having. I assume you're having a polling place election. So if the person in your office is not serving as an election judge, then and your mayor is not available, I mean, that's who you have to ask first. Your mayor is your fallback assistant in a canvass. But if your mayor's not available, or if the mayor position was on the ballot, and you don't have a municipal judge or an election commission, and your staff was not serving as an election judge on election day, then the answer is yes, you can use that person as your canvas.
Perfect. When tallying ballot totals, is there a reason you would want to separate the AV, I guess absentee voter ballot count, from the others?
Well, absentee ballots are treated differently from people who walk into your polling place, and that would be the reason why you would treat them differently, and I would say yes. And all you're doing is, and when you look at state law in a polling place election, is that absentee ballots are counted separately, so they should be noted separately. And absentee ballots in a polling place election are counted after all the votes for the people who come into the polling place have been accounted for. That is the reason for listing them separately.
Okay, that one looked like the last question that we have submitted, and you've already handled all the ones you were asked in advance. So while we give them just a minute in case anyone else has any questions, do you have any closing thoughts?
I do. I just want to talk to the people who are doing signature verification. And if you have not applied for your DEO access, make sure you do that, because it's the easy way to do signature verification. And I just want to let you know about an email I got from the Secretary of State's office. And when you are having people assisting you with the signature verification lookup, let me tell you, if you haven't applied, the way the process is going to work. And this is a little different from what we said earlier. So each municipality will receive a single username and password. It will be the name of your community. So, it could be, the example that was used in her email was Monument Judges. So the username would be Monument Judges, and then the password will be provided to you. So everybody who's looking signatures up using the DEO access will have simultaneous access to the Secretary of State's database and the signatures, and everybody can log in using the same, as I said, same username and password. And the reason for this is that it gives the DEO the opportunity to manage all the passwords, and then once the election is over, can actually go ahead and cancel the password by contacting the Secretary of State's office. In any event, the usernames and passwords will be null and void after 90 days, unless you want to re-up it for some other purpose. When I was in Aurora, I think I mentioned that I used it to vet people who applied for the boards and commissions simply because there was a requirement that they be registered electors. And then they will provide you with information on how to access the lookup and the information that you need. I'm more than happy to go ahead and post this through the listserv and ask CMCA to post it through their email site, so you'll have this information. But please make sure you get your DEO access. It is the easiest way to look up the signatures when it comes to signature verification. So I want to make sure I mentioned that at this point.
Perfect. We did have a few more questions.
Sure.
On the end. For a mail ballot election, does the absentee ballot have to be counted separately? Do I identify them as absentee before sending them out?
I would be surprised if in a mail ballot election you get a whole lot of absentee ballots, but if you have snowbirds or something like that, then I would go ahead and do them separately and then go ahead and count them after the close of the polls.
Can you go over the process for a challenge for a polling place election? Can the challenge be made in writing by a watcher, or can it be made verbally?
I know this was on the listserv earlier today, and as I'm scrambling to look up the section here, challenges have to be made in writing. There is a form that if you look at 31-10, Part 11, so the first section is 1101. Actually, if you look at 1102, it provides you with all the information regarding how you challenge someone. And it says the challenge to vote, the challenge must be made by written oath. So there is a form that the person doing the challenging completes. And then as part of that form, I believe there is a form that the challenge voter completes. And if the voter indicates that he's eligible to vote, then I think the challenge has been met. And then, the only recourse is the person doing the challenger can go to the DA. So it all has to be done in writing. Somebody can't come in, point to a voter and say, that person isn't eligible to vote, and don't let him vote and then walk out. That doesn't work. And remember, all challenges have to be made prior to the voter actually voting, or prior to the voter dropping his ballot into the ballot box, because once that happens, you have no idea which of those ballots that voter voted. So check out the statute. That should give you the answer to your question.
This next question seems to be a continuation from a previous one. So in a mail ballot election, if you only have, say, 3 absentee ballots, can you then at that time include the totals with the mail ballot results? I guess the concern is the privacy, just as with UOCAVA, if you only have a couple.
Well, absentee ballots are going to be counted after the polls close the night of the election. So the only place so you don't know, no one's going to know who those absentee voters are. I mean, they really aren't, and they're going to be made a total. What the concern is that if you've got 2 UOCAVA voters and you're in a small community and everybody knows that Ben and Phil are in Afghanistan, and the vote comes back and a candidate and Ben and Phil vote for the same candidate, and you've got your unofficial results, and the results are like 50 to 42, and then suddenly Ben and Phil turn their ballots in, and now it's 50 to 44, you know how Ben and Phil voted. You're not going to have that information on the absentee voters, because nobody's going to know except the absentee voters and your judges, who are not allowed to reveal anything, who the absentee voters are. So I would say that what I said before is what you need to do. You count in any kind of election, you count your mail, you process your mail ballots, you can add your absentee ballots. Actually, you can add your absentee ballots to on the last day when you're counting your mail ballots, and then you don't have to list them separately. So let me say it again. In a polling place election, they're dealt with separately. An absentee ballot is still a mailed ballot. So go ahead and include them in with the count. All right?
Okay. Let's see. I have never had poll watchers before, but I assume doing a mail ballot election that they would be allowed to sit with the election judges through the entire day, including the counting. Is that true?
Well, the answer is that they can observe everything that goes on during the election day, but nobody's sitting with the election judges. They can be in the room with the election judges, and although our watcher statute does not prescribe, distance from the judges or anything else, it is your requirement, or it's your obligation as the DEO, to ensure that while they can see what's going on, They can't be staring over the judge's shoulders, and they can definitely not be interfering in the process. And they are certainly not allowed to say, well, I don't think this signature matches. I don't care what you say. So they can watch the process. They can't interfere. But yes, they are eligible, and they can, a mail ballot election, they can show up at any point in the process, as long as they are authorized by the candidates. And remember, one at a time for each candidate, and if there are ballot items, they can be authorized by the proponents if there, are proponents. Let's call it representatives of the ballot item. Now, if it was put on the ballot by the governing body, I guess the governing body could bring somebody in, as long as it's not them, to watch the process.
Okay. Do judges check the signatures of absentee ballots in a polling place election?
No. Signature verification is for mail ballot elections only, period.
Perfect. Okay, so for the last round of questions, it looks like that was the final one.
Okay.
So let's see. Thank you so much, Karen, for joining us today, and thank you to all of our participants who joined us. But as a reminder, if you'd like to watch it again, both the PowerPoint by itself and the recording of this training will be on our website by the end of the week, and it'll be under training materials.
And I have one more thing to say.
Yes.
This is the last pre-election webinar. We will be doing another one in April. I believe it's the 19th of April, and I call it a post-mortem, where we want to talk about. Oh yeah, yes.
Formally called the election debrief.
It's a debrief, but I call it a post-mortem. That's just my own little term. It's election debrief, and we're going to just talk about how things went. I'm going to be particularly interested in hearing from people who had to do the signature verification, how that worked. We want to look at kind of ways that we can improve it. I know that there's a lot of election law that just doesn't seem relevant these days, and you've heard me say that if I could guarantee that anything that we gave to the legislators would be the only thing that was considered, I'd be the first one down at the Capitol promoting amendments to our election code. However, I've been around long enough to know that's not how it works. But we also want to talk about, what worked, what didn't work, what you people were confused about. I think we also can take some requests for additional trainings, maybe for the next go round. So it's going to be wide open, and I hope that you will participate. And I think we have another question.
We do. We actually have two more questions.
Okay, great.
I love how active the clerks are. Okay. When absentee ballots are processed at a polling place election, do the judges announce the name of the person whose ballot they are opening for the benefit of the watchers?
I would say no.
Okay. And then, does Karen want to speak to election signs or electioneering?
Okay.
I like that she gives you the option.
Sure. Okay. Well, first of all, by law, I know electioneering can occur within 100 feet of the polling location. And generally, you measure the location not from the place where they drop the ballot in the box, but generally it's measured from the perimeter of the building in which the polling place is located. And I have had situations where I've had to go out with one of those little rolling measures or a tape measure or something like that, and actually measure off 100 feet and put a sign that says no electioneering past this point. In terms, and that includes election signs. I'm not exactly sure what the question is about election signs, but let me tell you what I know. There is generally when election signs go up and when they're taken down is a matter of local control. And you probably find that in your zoning or your sign ordinances. And election signs are to be considered as any other sign, which means they cannot be restricted to particular areas of your municipality. I think it certainly is reasonable to keep them out of the rights of way, telephone poles, anything that is public. Election signs currently do not have to have any attribution on it. In other words, by that I mean that at the bottom of the sign it doesn't have to say paid for by fill in the blank. That's no longer required, although, election law changes, so we'll see what happens. And that's pretty much it.
All right, wonderful. I think that's our last question. And then I would like to do a little plug for some of the work that I do. I'm the one who tracks all of your elections. And so most of you have received probably letters, emails, some of you maybe even phone calls asking you for information, the names of the candidates running, as well as any ballot issues or questions that you might have. So if you have not sent that our way to CML, then I would love if you did, and I would also appreciate any unofficial results as soon as you have them, and I'll probably be giving some of you a call on April 4th. So with that, I believe that's everything. So thank you all for joining us today. And this concludes the webinar, and I wish everyone a happy afternoon.